All right, let's take a look at this. It says part 2B. We're going to cut right into 1 Corinthians, or not 1 Corinthians, 1 Timothy chapter 1, 1 Timothy chapter 2, and we're still working on verse 12. We're at the spot where it says, but to be silent, to take authority over the man, but to be in silence. Here again, we have another word that is taken as, okay, let's go back. Yeah, but to be in silence here. The word there is the same word. See, we know this is Paul because he wrote 1 Corinthians and he wrote 2 Timothy, and he uses the same words when he's talking about women in the assembly. Now he's using the same, he's repeating himself, and this is the second time in this passage where he uses this word. The word is hezukios, and we talked about it before. But it means tranquility arising from within, free from agitation and undisturbed. Paul really wants women to get this, and he's repeating himself not only in 1 Corinthians, but he's repeating himself a second time in this passage as well. Women, learn this tranquility that rises from within. Learn to be undisturbed and unagitated. And the reason why I think he repeats this over again and over again is, women, you're going to need this. If you're going to follow what Paul is saying, if you're going to do what Paul is saying about squeezing men until they feel the pain of their irresponsibility and passivity in spiritual things, you're going to need this one. You're going to need to learn into this one, because this remaining tranquil is not something that is going to be something that comes natural to you. Because why? Because women have this innate thing that says, I need to make sure things are right. And if men can't get things right, then I will fix it and get things right. Well, in the area of taking initiative, and I tell you, some of the best romance movies around are watching men squirm in the fire of taking the initiative to ask a woman out, to ask a woman to marry them. We see it even in there, is that men hate taking the initiative. They don't want to. They take initiative in every area of life. They're right there, leading out in front when it comes to every other area. But when it comes to taking initiative for the spiritual welfare of their families and their church, they're absolutely scared to death to take it. And they're absolutely scared to death to hear the feedback of wives that jump out of their tranquility and say, that was pathetic. Let me clean that up. They're scared of that. They're really scared of the feedback of women that say, you missed a spot. And there's a natural thing in women to do that. And there's a natural thing in men to say, I'm going to hold on to my passivity. I'm going to hold on to my bumpkinism harder because you keep on nagging at me about it. All right. There's a great fear in that, to be silent. And the example, of course, is going to be, Paul is repeating himself because women are really going to need this, and he uses, again, Sarah as an example. Verse 13, for Adam was first formed, then Eve. What? What does that have to do with teaching in the church? What does that have to do with taking initiative to lead the flock into green pastures? What? For Adam was first formed. The word "for" there, just a tiny little word, but it means assigning a reason, giving an explanation. You see that little word there, and it means because. Women, you need to do these things. Men need to step up because, and he whips all the way back. Don't get your neck bent out of shape. He whips all the way back to Genesis to give his reasons why. Finally, after everything that he said beforehand, he's finally going to tell us why. Because we're striving to understand what he said, what he meant. Now he's going to tell us why. And here it is. Because Adam was first formed, then Eve. Wow. There has been some really strange interpretations of Adam was first formed that have come out of. The one interpretation is very immature reasoning. It says that because Adam was created first, he's the oldest and he was there first, therefore he gets to decide everything. That's elementary playground stuff. That's a reasoning that otherwise reasonable and mature people have concluded that the reason why women need to be quiet and men, because men are first. Men are first, and we'll get to first. But this whole thing, and the other rationale, it's really a strange one, is illogical as all get out. In Deuteronomy 21:15-17, there's an obscure passage there, the one place in the Scriptures where it says that the firstborn gets twice the inheritance. And therefore they say, men are twice as important as women are, and therefore they get to decide everything. And that is another place that otherwise reasonable people lose their reasoning, because if they were going to remain consistent with that and say that the firstborn is the big deal, then the only ones that should be allowed to teach or lead in the church are firstborn sons. If they're going to use this firstborn gets twice the inheritance idea, then if you're not a firstborn or if you're not a son, sit down, shut up. And that's just, where do people get this stuff from? Adam was first formed, so there's illogical and there's immature stuff that goes on in there. But let's take a look at this word first. Adam was first formed. The word that is used in our Greek text is the word protos. And it means to lead from the front. To lead the front, the one who precedes. And that one who precedes, to lead from the front, our English word, or our word that is commonly used, is initiates. Adam was first formed. He was the one. Adam is supposed to lead from the front. And this is the pathetic thing, is that men want to push from behind. You call the kids on the phone. Then tell me what they said. They want to push from behind. And they want the women to lead from the front. They want the women to initiate this thing, and they want to sit in the background and mumble things. Okay, and so, but what he's saying here is that Adam is protos, the initiator, the one who leads from the front. instead of pushes from behind. Adam was responsible. And the reason why he was responsible is, I think, because he had some benefits. But the word proton is the other word. Let me see if I've got that on here. Right here. Proton is the other word for first that's used in Scripture. And that one means, rail switch, here we are again. You can either take it and say, well, first means protos, or you can say first means proton. Proton means above all others, and the priority over. Guess which firsts the church has adopted? The one that says that Adam has the priority. Adam is above Eve, therefore men are above women. Men's desires, men's wants, men's needs, men's ideas take priority over women's. That's just not what it says there, because the word is protos, which means men are to shoulder the responsibility to initiate teaching in the church, in the assembly. He's to lead to the front in spiritual matters. Men first. Here's protos. Here's another place where protos is used. And the proponents of male dominance don't like this one at all. They don't like this one because they're into... The reason why I get to say, and the reason why I call the shots, is because Adam was first formed. Ha ha. But look at what Jesus says. He turns the whole thing on its head. He says right there, he says, let's see if I can... He says, he who would be first, protos, not proton, he would be the, not he who would be the priority over everybody else, he that would be above everybody else. No, he says, he who would initiate, he who would lead from the front. And men say, I'm too humble for that. I won't lead. It's placed right on your shoulders. Placed right on your shoulders. But he who would initiate, let him be the servant of all. Let him be your servant. So he's saying, if you want to be first, if men first is your doctrine, then men first in servanthood. Men first in, actually the word there is slave. Oh, how many men consider them to be slaves of everybody else? No. Who wears the pants in your family? See, that's what we get, is that instead of being servant of all, they get to be Lord of all. And that is just not what he was saying there at all. Jesus puts it right. He says, men first? Okay, let's do men first. Let's do men first just for a second here. The toilet needs cleaning. Men first. The dishes are piling up. Men first. Get in there. The children need disciplining. Men first. I could go on. But you get the drift of what I'm saying there. If men first is what you believe, then get it right. You be the first one. You lead from the front in the mundane. You need to be the one who encounters danger before any of the rest of your family does. You need to be leading from the front in all those areas of slavehood that have been totally misunderstood by the church. You want to be first? Fine. Go all the way and be first, men, because Adam was first. Adam had a couple of advantages in being first. Let's see where I'm at here. Okay. And so there's 6. Adam had an advantage in being first. Do you realize, if you've ever done a study and you've been able to take off the blinders and just looked at Genesis 1, 2, 3, Adam had 6. These are the recorded ones, okay? I'm not saying there might be stuff left out, but I'm saying that what we have that is written, and no jot and tittle should be taken away, is that Adam had 6 first-hand encounters and experiences with God because he was first. Because he was first, there was 6 times that are recorded where he was face to face and saw God and heard God that Eve never had because she hadn't been created yet. Adam, remember I talked about learn by experience? Adam learned about God through first-hand experience. And so that's an advantage that Adam had over Eve. He saw God face to face in chapter 128. He heard specific directions and work assignments from God, verse 28, and chapter 2:15. He watched God plant a garden in 2:8 and 9. He watched God plant the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil in 2:9. He heard directly from God. Listen, he heard directly from God the prohibition concerning the tree of knowledge and of good and evil. He heard it directly from God. Guess who wasn't there to hear it? And he heard God associate with the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. He heard God use the words evil and death to describe it. He heard God say that he would make a helpmeet for him. Eve wasn't created when God said that. It's a good commentary on Adam's diligence in teaching. Here we go. It says, I don't want women to teach because men need to do it because they're so bad at it. Okay, that's totally inefficient, but there's a principle going on here. Think about Adam's taking the initiative to teach Eve all that he had through first-hand experience. Obviously, he didn't do a very good job of passing it on. He muttered and he mumbled and shrugged his shoulders and stuff like that. And Eve did not get, by first-hand experience, the only way she got these things was by second-hand experience through Adam. And obviously, there wasn't a good communication there. There wasn't a good communication. What we have is a failure to communicate. Whose responsibility is that? Because Eve was gullible, stupid, and evil? No, it's because Adam did not take the initiative to teach her. So he was prepared to encounter the serpent. Eve was not. Not nearly as prepared to encounter the serpent as Adam was. Okay, that was passed on to her. Let's see. Next word. And Adam was prepared by God to confront the serpent. Yes. Formed is the next word. Wow. First formed. Adam was first formed. Greek word that is used there for formed in 1 Timothy chapter 2 is plaso, and it means to fashion out of a soft mass. Adam was fashioned out of a soft mass. All right, let's think about that for a little while and go back to Genesis chapter 2. It says this about Adam's being first formed. It says that the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, or dust of the earth. All right. Any of you that garden or know anything about agriculture, farm, or anything like that, any of you that have gotten in direct contact with the ground, know that ground, earth, is not a soft mass. It's not a soft mass. And yet Adam was created out of the ground. Okay? The ground is hard, unyielding, hard to move. So, and I think that's man. That's the male species. Without a process that goes on, men are that way. They can turn on the charm, but then later on you find out that they're just hard, unmoving, and stubborn. So, guess what? If God was going to make Adam out of dust, what has to happen to earth, ground, in order to make dust? What has to happen? There has to be, and this is what it says there. It says in Hebrews, where it says formed, the Hebrew word there, I got it up on here. Yeah, it's formed, and it means God distressed, cramped, squeezed into shape Adam from the dust of the ground. You can't get dust from the ground until you distress it. You got to plow it, you got to beat it, you got to hoe it, you've got to put a lot of heat on it. You got to put a lot of arid conditions on ground in order to get it to the point where it's dust. Man is not a soft mass. Man is a hard, unyielding, stubborn, and selfish guy. I'm not saying that women aren't, but this is man here, is that he was formed out of the ground. But there had to be a process. And God made a process of the ground until he had dust. Until he had dust. And that's what he squeezed, cramped, distressed Adam out of. His ground. Brothers and sisters, in every other area of life, men are easy to be entreated. Men can be soft, they can learn. They're eager to learn in every other area of life. They can learn. But when it comes to spiritual matters in their family and church, they've already made up their minds. They're unyielding. They're hard unless there's a process that God puts them through until they become a soft mass that He can use. Because men are the poster child for I've already made up my mind. So there needed to be some process that God did to make dust from the ground. And that process was not pretty. That process was not gentle. Men don't get gentle. Men get 2x4s across the forehead. We'll see that later on too as we get further into this thing about men. Adam had to be formed, and it was a tough and hard and violent process. Like the ground, it takes a lot to make it a soft mass. God must distress men until they're soft, like dust, distressed about the spiritual state of their family and church. Who is distressed about the spiritual state of their family and church? Women! Who is absolutely tranquil and undisturbed about the spiritual state of their family and church? Men. Paul turns the whole thing on its head and says, men, you need to get distressed. Women, you need to enter into tranquility. And men, you need to get distressed, and I'm just the guy to do it. So women, pray. You think Sarah was praying? Oh yeah, she was praying. So there's a distressing that needs to go on in order for men to finally get distressed about the things they need to be distressed over. When a man gets distressed over something, something's going to happen. While men are yawning and playing with their toys and in pursuit of all kinds of other lesser things, they are not at all worried about what's happening to their children and families and church in the spiritual realm. And that is where the big topsy-turvy is taking place here in what Paul says, is that Adam was first formed, and he went back to Genesis to tell us what that is. Now the next thing is that men, in order to become disturbed over the spiritual state of things, they're going to have to deny their natural inclination, which is to be, don't bother me. Don't interrupt me. I'm focused on my toys. I'm focused on my work. I'm focused on everything else except for that which really matters. It has eternal value. So they're going to have to deny that urge to stay undisturbed and become distressed, cramped, and become active in that. And women are to deny themselves because they're the ones that are so upset over the whole business. That's what Paul's advice is. Yeah, but what will happen to my family? What will happen if he just is left to his own devices? Take the example of Sarah. Abraham let things fall to pieces. Yet God was there to take care of her, and He finally distressed Abraham enough so that he would be a soft mass, but he wasn't at first. All right. Now, the next thing is that Adam was first formed, and he had advantages, and he was made into a soft mass so that God could make him into what He wanted him to be. Now, here's the thing, is that now we've got Eve coming along in here. Get the right page here. Eve, then Eve. Second, Adam was first formed. He had all these experiences with God. Then Eve was formed, and she's just a newbie. She's just a newbie on the scene. And guess what? It was Adam's responsibility to take the initiative and pass on what he knew to her and bring her into experiences of God, and he didn't, because she was so enticed by the serpent's subtlety. He wasn't. Let's find out why. Here's the thing about, he took a rib out of Adam's side to make Eve. Adam was formed. Eve was not formed from the dust of the ground. Did you ever think about that? Eve was not formed from the dust of the ground. I took a look at these chapters again, and I found out that Eve is the only living creature that was not formed from the dust from the ground. Trees, fish, animals, men, all were formed from the ground. Eve was not. She was one step removed from the ground. Wow. Think about that when you start looking at women again. She was one step away from the earthiness that every other creature had, and is in their being, the earthiness. It says Adam in 2 Corinthians says Adam was of the earth, earthy, and men they can be put on refinement, but only because they have an ulterior motive for doing so. If you leave them to their own devices, they're earthy. Women, on the other hand, because of Eve being a step removed, is not so earthy. She doesn't like the things that earthy men do and say and think. The things of the earth that men are so interested in are just disgusting to women. Most women, anyway. So, what we've got is that God He formed Adam, which means squeezing a soft mass, through distress, but He built Eve. It says, and He made Eve from that rib. Built means our made is to build and to construct. Women are built. I'm not going to go any further into that. But men were squeezed into shape by God's process. Women are just built, constructed. And the image I get in this is a tree is formed out of the earth, out of the ground. And if you take that tree and you take a timber out of that tree, you take a plank, because guess what rib means in Hebrew? It means a plank, a timber. I got it up there? Yeah. It means a plank or timber, a side of a person, a side of a person. Guess what happened is that it's like Adam was this tree, and God took it and He sawed up a plank out of it, and He constructed Eve out of it, just like you would take a board or a plank out of a tree, and you would construct a beautiful coffee table out of it. Tree, coffee table. And that's what He built, constructed Eve out of a side of Adam, a side of him. Now, Adam had many sides. In fact, one of the reasons why I think God said it's not good for man to be alone was not because he was lonely, because the word alone doesn't mean I'm lonely. It means self-sufficient. Self-sufficient is what... It's not good for a man to be self-sufficient, and Adam was self-sufficient. God took a piece of him out so that he wasn't all there anymore. He wasn't all there. Okay? Every woman knows that men are not all there. Men are the only ones that kid themselves about that. He took a side, not just a little bitty bone. He took a whole side out of Adam and constructed something that was more refined, something that had to go through a process to become what she was. And that is what we have in the imagery of Adam taking or God taking the side, the rib out of Adam. Took it out. If something is taken out of Adam, does he have that anymore? Does he have that? If God took a side out of Adam, took it out, does he have that side in him any longer? It's missing. It's missing. Now, this was all before sin entered the scene. This was God said, this is all very good. Okay? Adam, it was not good for him to be able to do it all and have it all and be it all. So he took something out of Adam and constructed something quite different from him. And that is Eve. Took Eve. The attributes and nature that are the very essence of what women are built out of are pretty much absent in men. There are things that are the absolute priority among women universally that men just don't care about. And you can say that, yeah, and I believe they are lazy, passive, apathetic, selfish, and all those things, but to tell you the truth, there's a side of him that it just doesn't have anymore. Women could say, come on, you got to make this an important thing in our lives together. And men are just going, I just don't see it. If men are going to learn, as it says, dwell with your wives according to knowledge, they're going to have to learn and be distressed enough by God's distressing machine to be able to say, I don't see it, but if it's important to you, I trust you that it's important. Wow! Men simply don't have something that women are built out of. Let's go on here. He no longer had. All right, the big question is, what side of Adam was taken out of him and given to Eve? All right. It doesn't say in so many words here, but there are, remember when you just can't understand it by looking at what the words really mean and you still can't get the right one, then you've got to go to the next tool in the toolbox of somebody who's going to interpret Scripture. You have to look at the context. You have to look at what was said around this statement of Eve was made from a rib of Adam. And you find out in a couple of places, and I'm going to look at this. I've got it all written down here. Let's see if I can do this in a more gradual sense. What was taken out of Eve, you got to look at the contextual clues in Genesis 3:1 and 2 Corinthians 11:3. Both of them talk about the serpent. And I have found it very enlightening to find out what the serpent was like and why Eve fell for him. And that's the context that I'm going with, and I suggested to you that in 1 Corinthians 11:3, we have a hint. Paul says, I'm worried about you, that you would be seduced, enticed, deceived by the subtlety of the serpent. By the subtlety of the serpent. Okay, Genesis 3:1 says, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. The characteristic of the serpent, at the forefront of the serpent's presentation was subtlety. It was subtlety. It wasn't like many translations say cunning. It wasn't the cunningness of the serpent. It wasn't the craftiness of the serpent. It wasn't that he gave such incredibly airtight arguments. Eve wasn't really into airtight arguments. She wasn't into identifying, aha, I know where the P is under those. Yeah, it's not that. The only reason why I can see why Eve, instead of calling out to God or calling out to Adam, when a snake started talking to her, was because it was very subtle. It was very subtle. And I think, and I'm just laying this out before you, is that this was the thing that enticed Eve to have a conversation with a talking snake. Because in Hebrew, the word subtle means, and I think I've got it up here, serpent subtlety. What subtlety is in Hebrew is delicate and smooth. Write that down. Is that the serpent was so interesting to Eve that she would overcome this weirdness that was going on because it was smooth. Because there was a delicacy to it that, remember how delicate a coffee table is compared to a tree trunk? And how God took a side out of Adam and made it the very essence of Eve? I think that we're talking about is subtlety. Eve was really interested, really sensitive to, and really responded to subtlety, to a delicate, smooth approach. Because that was the characteristic that both Paul and Moses said was the thing that the serpent approached Eve with, is subtleness. And so, when we have this delicate and smooth approach, it doesn't have to be rational. It doesn't have to be, reasonable. It just needs to be smooth. It needs to be delicate. It needs to be well said. It needs to be well presented. As you know, as well as I do, and there's many comedies that have been made out of this, is that women are very much aware of subtleties than men are. Men just don't have it to be subtle. They might try for ulterior motives to be smooth and delicate, but it's only a facade. Subtleness they don't get, and they don't do it very well even when they try. Women, on the other hand, my goodness sakes, the subtle cues that are going on all around them, and they're seeing all this. It just naturally comes right in, all the subtleties of people and their surroundings and everything is very much attuned to subtle delicacy and refinement. And that's what they respond to. And I think that that is the side that was taken out of Adam and given to Eve, according to the subtle, or according to the contextual clues that I've got here, is that the serpent was subtle, and guess what? Eve was interested, even though it was really out of whack. Men don't have it. They just don't get it, and women know it. Men are really klutzy when it comes to the subtle things of life, and women can flash their subtle hints at men. As in major ways, they can flash their hints to men, and men are just going. They just haven't got it in them to pick up the subtle cues. They just don't. And that's not, and remember, these things were in Adam and Eve. These were characteristics of Adam and Eve before sin entered the picture. It wasn't bad that Adam didn't get it. And it wasn't bad that Eve was just really sensitive to subtle cues, subtle hints, subtle words, subtle appearance, subtlety along the way. And so that's what I think is going on here, is the side that was taken out of Adam, that he was totally inadequate in, was subtlety. He could not get the subtle cues that women know so by nature. It's just blaring to them, and Adam, he just wasn't getting it. He just wasn't interested. He did not fall for subtlety. He was just being his passive, self-absorbed self. And that's what I think was going on there. And both that lack of subtlety in men and that heightened subtlety in women are both very good. God declared it after He had created everything, including Eve. He said, "This is very good." So don't be down on the other gender because they have these things that are so pronounced in one and so absent in the other. It's just not there. You need to be a little bit more dwelling with your spouse, dwelling with the men of the church in a little bit more knowledge about this. They're just not all there. They're just not all there. Don't be mad at them for that. All right. Adam was not deceived. Remember, he's talking about reasons why women should not teach or take initiative. Adam was not deceived. And so what we think here is that this is a positive statement about Adam. That Adam was so smart, he was so able to see through what the serpent was doing, that he was so capable that he wasn't deceived by the serpent. Well, no. Based on what I'm saying is that God took a side out of Adam that he did no longer have. So when the serpent came and deceived, it found absolutely nothing of interest in Adam. He just didn't have it. He didn't have it to be seduced by the subtlety, smoothness, and delicateness of the serpent. It just wasn't there. It didn't mean that he was smart, that he was great, he was intellectually superior, or in any other way superior. It just meant that subtlety is wasted on Adam. So the serpent, being who he is, guess what? He didn't waste his subtlety on Adam. Adam just didn't have it in him to get interested in this stuff. He wasn't interested. He just wanted to do his thing. So Adam was not deceived. Why? Because he was so superior? No, because it had been taken out of him, the interest that he might be deceived. Two reasons. He wasn't superior. Let's see if I got him up here. The first reason, he was unaffected by the lies because he had first experience. He's also had this sensitivity to subtly taken out of him. Here's the point I really want to make in this thing, is that Adam had been prepared by God to confront the serpent. He had all these first-hand experiences with God. He knew in his knower, as charismatics say, he knew in his knower what God wanted, what God was like, what God did, what God had said. So he was prepared by God so that lies weren't going to affect him. He knew what he knew because he had experienced it. Okay? Eve didn't have that advantage. So did the serpent approach Adam? No. He approached the one that only had secondhand experience, and possibly that wasn't very good information. Because men are supposed to take the responsibility of teaching, and Adam doesn't want to. So the first thing is that the sensitivity was taken out of him. He just didn't get it. And he was unaffected because he was equipped by many first-hand experiences. He was the one that was supposed to confront that doggone serpent. He was the one that was supposed to step up and address this thing. But no, he was reneging on the responsibilities that he was so much prepared for and that Eve was ill-equipped to do. Men need to do spiritual warfare for their families and church. They need to do this because they have been equipped by God to do so from the beginning. You need to step up, grow a spine, and do spiritual warfare for your families. And not instead of saying, well, my wife does that kind of stuff. Let the women do that. They're so much better at it. No, they're not. Adam didn't think he was adequate, but he was. He was. Because he was formed first. And a side of him was taken out. Now that was a blessing to Adam that was taken out, because when the serpent came to him with subtle lies, doink, they would bounce off of Adam because he had been prepared by God. Eve, on the other hand, was very interested in subtle lies. So those are two reasons. Next one. But the woman being deceived, why was she deceived? Why was she deceived? Well, for the same reasons. She missed out on a lot of first-hand experiences with God. That was through no fault of her own. She wasn't off in the garden doing her own thing. She just didn't exist yet. It's no fault of her own. And she was affected by the lies because she did not have as many first-hand things, and she was built out of sensitivity to subtlety. The subtle lie. Why would Eve talk to a talking snake? Because the conversation was so interesting. Yeah, the woman was deceived. But remember, the thing about deceived doesn't mean that she was evil, stupid, or gullible. You need to look at these words here a little closer. The word deceived means to give a pleasant illusion. Do I have it up there? Okay, deceived, greatly affected. I do not have it up here. It's that the woman, Eve, was deceived, and the word deceived means, write it down, I'm sorry it's not on the overhead there. It means to give a pleasant illusion. How many of you understand by being deceived that being deceived is not an unpleasant experience? Being deceived is a very pleasant experience. If you just suddenly got nauseated every time you were deceived, nobody would be deceived. And yet we got the whole world that's being deceived by things because it's pleasant. It's an illusion, but it's pleasant to believe that illusion. The pain will only come in deception when you become disillusioned and you find out the reality behind the illusion, and then you'll get the pain. Then you will get the regret. Then you will say, I lost an opportunity that I can never get back. So that's the thing about deception. And even if Adam's teaching was inadequate, she needed to stay out of it because she was formed second. And because she was formed second, she was much more likely to get a pleasant illusion out of subtle lies. All you got to do is have a smooth presentation. All you got to do is have your hair slicked back, nice suit, background is there, the lighting, even a little fog. Men are going, that's so stupid. And women are going, ooh. Ooh. So subtle lies. Okay. Does that mean that all women are taken in by subtlety? No. But they have had to learn Christ just the way that men have had to learn Christ. They have to have first-hand experiences of God. In other words, a personal relationship with Jesus in order for this seduction to subtleties to be stood up against, to be denied, to be refused. Where men are just saying, I don't get it. So, of course, was in the is not was in the. That was again, I don't know why the translators put that in there, because the Greek word there doesn't mean was in the. You can look up was in the, and it's not that word. I don't know why they put was in the, because that Greek word there was in the means to fall or to have fallen. It doesn't mean was in the. Where did they come up with that? I don't know. It was in the. So the woman was deceived and was in or fell into or had fallen. Now, how many know that, I'll get to that here. I'll go on to the next one. She was she fell into the transgression. Transgression, it's one of those words that's been heavily laced with shame and heavily laced with, shame, guilt along the way. But transgression simply means to step over, to overstep. To overstep. How many of you have overstepped? Yeah, you crossed the line. You crossed the line. But see, the thing about transgression is that this transgression thing, it means to overstep. You got to have something to overstep if there's going to be an overstep. That means that there has to be a line someplace. Romans chapter 4, verse 15 says, is that where there is a law, it can be overstepped. It says, where there is no law, there is no transgression, right? So if there's no line in the sand, because law means what? Boundary line. So if you don't have a boundary line, you can't overstep. I'm fine. There's no boundary line. But as soon as God drew a line in the sand, and what was the line that God drew in the sand for Adam and Eve? Drew a line around that tree. Drew a line around that tree. And Eve fell over the line. Think about that. She didn't arrogantly strut over the line. She fell over the line, which means there was a tripping that took place. She fell because she was tripped over the line. And I appreciate that understanding of the word for transgression, to that it's an overstep. That's the line. She was tripped up by this presentation by the serpent into stepping over the line. She fell across the line, and she was, in fact, deceived, and she was fallen in transgression. And guess what? Transgression has a consequence. And what was it? You shall surely die. That was it. We're not talking about anything less than transgression having a consequence. She overstepped the line by falling for the serpent's subtlety. She overstepped the line by falling for the serpent's subtlety. And men weren't superior because they didn't fall for it. They just didn't have it in them to be seduced. All right. And of course, here I've got it here again, is that Adam had the advantages. Okay, he was unaffected. He had first-hand experiences of God. He was unaffected by the serpent's subtlety. He didn't think he was ready, but guess what? God had prepared him. And I want to say it again. Men need to be doing spiritual warfare for their families and for their church, or it will not get done. How did it work out for Adam when he didn't confront the serpent? You think it's going to turn out any better now? Don't want to be scoldy, but that's what we're saying now. So she was in the transgression. She fell for his subtlety. She went over the line. However, notwithstanding, the good news is, in verse 15 here, is that notwithstanding, but why'd they put that great big word in there? It's just a tiny little Greek word, and it just means and. It just means and. It doesn't mean notwithstanding. It means and. So what we have here is a connection and connects what has just been said with what will just be said, what is going to be said. So what we have here is Eve was deceived and was in the transgression, and she shall be saved. And she shall be saved. Let's take a look at that. That's a big deal here. Boy, I've seen some mental gymnastics on this one. Notwithstanding, and she shall be saved. And now this word is a very special word that Paul uses for saved here, that people have rail switched all over the place. You know how many ways you can define saved? I went to my linguistic scholars to find out what it means here. It's a great big word. Did I put it down here? There it is. Yeah, it's a big word there. And I'm not even going to try to say it, and you don't need to remember it. But here's the definition. Very specific about what saved means here. It means the eschatological. It just means the final salvation from the divine wrath. It means she shall be saved at the end from divine wrath. Wow. Okay. Are you getting saved in any other way? Men? No way. No way. This is the salvation that we're enjoying now and will get the full download later. So this is not being saved from death in childbirth. This is not saved from dominating her husband. Otherwise, very reasonable people come up with these things. It is not saved from the world's evils by being barefoot and pregnant all the time. And yet these are the kinds of things that are still being written today. So, she needs to be saved from the consequences of her transgression. And Adam needs to too, and his transgression was far worse than Eve's. You know why? Because she was tripped into it. Adam walked across the line with his eyes wide open. He had first-hand experiences with God that told him otherwise, and he didn't have it in him to be seduced by subtleties of the serpent. He'd had neither one, and yet he did it anyway. That's why the rest of Scripture says that sin is laid directly on the shoulders of Adam, not Eve. Not Eve. Okay. Saved in childbearing. My goodness sakes. Boy, there's a lot in that one. So, it's not those other things. And here we go. In. In is a simple word, and it means through or by the means of. So, and then the Greek text adds a word that has been taken out of every English text that I could find. The word the little word the, that's a rail switch that'll take you one direction or another. The identifies what kind of childbearing. The. Underline it. The childbearing. She shall be saved by means of the childbearing. Like there's one specific overriding childbirth that she will be saved through. Oh yeah, now you're getting it. Now you're getting it. Okay, now you're getting it. This notion that women will be saved from eternal damnation because they bear children, that's around. That's around, you guys, because they bear children and they do it without complaining. Oh, God, help the church. Does that fly in the face of the entire gospel or what? And yet, there's many people that say, I believe the gospel The gospel is the gospel truth. And yet they will espouse to nonsense like women are going to be saved by bearing children. God will take them to heaven because they bear children. Oh, Lord. Oh, God. Okay, so childbearing. Everybody gets saved the same way. It's a contradiction of the gospel. Here's the word childbearing that Paul is referring to. He goes back to Genesis again. When he says the childbearing, he's talking about Genesis 3 verses 15 and 16. 15 and 16, because the word childbearing is used in verse 16. And they say, as a consequence of sin, that you're going to have all this pain and you're going to die. That's your sin, and you've got to pay for it. No, that's not, if you paint that all with the same brush, that's what you get. But it's not that way. We're talking about the childbearing, not just any childbearing, not any woman bearing, not every woman bearing, but it's a certain childbearing that if you believe anything other than childbearing that's talked about in Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15 doesn't even say the word childbearing. That comes in the next verse. But if you look at Genesis 3:15, it says that it talks about childbearing in a very Hebraic figure there. It says childbearing is seed. Seed. Okay? You bear a child, that's your seed, right? Seed means descendant by birth. Seed means posterity and offspring by birth. That's what seed means in Hebrew. And so what we have here is that we have this verse that says this. This is God speaking to the serpent of all people. He's talking to the serpent. He says, I will put enmity between the serpent's seed. Interesting, the serpent will have descendants. Interesting that Jesus would say, you are of your father, the devil. And he was not talking about the dregs of society when he said that. I will put in between the serpent's seed, the serpent's descendant, and her, Eve's seed or descendants. Okay? Eve had descendants. She hadn't had any yet. She had no seed yet. Eve's descendant, will bruise the serpent's head. And you, the serpent, will bruise Eve's descendant's heel. So that's a kind of a dividing up of that verse so it can be understood there, is that there was a descendant of Eve that was going to crush that serpent. That there was a way for us to get out from the bondage of that serpent's descendants through a childbirth, through a childbearing. Now, we've read the rest of the book, we realize that guess who had to bear a child in order for us to get that descendant that crushed his head, that bruised his head? Mary, right? Do you think about it for a second? Mary and her descendant could never have existed if Eve didn't bear children. So guess what? In a way, in a closer understanding of this, her bearing of children did in fact save her, because she is saved by grace through faith. It is a gift of God just as much as the rest of us are, and that was brought about and built by none other than our Savior Jesus Christ. And He had to be born, and He could never have been born unless Eve bore children. And so guess what? When Paul says, she shall be saved through the childbearing, he was not only saying that through the birth of Jesus, but he was also saying, you got to bear children, Eve, so that the descendant can be the salvation of all humanity. So that's the childbearing that's being talked about here. And then the final thing that is said here, that's what I think that Paul is saying as he's combining his Hebrew knowledge with his New Testament revelation. He's saying that Jesus was the fulfillment of the childbearing. But the childbearing had to start with Eve. It was a messy road, but God made sure we got there. Okay, she shall be saved if they continue. Now, we know the verse. It says that everybody gets saved the same way, and it's a gift of God. But look at the word gift. I mean, this is just Gary. Look at what's in the middle of the gift. If. And that's what Paul is saying here too. He's saying that, okay, yeah, salvation has been won for women and for everybody if you take it. If you take it by faith. If you take it by faith. If you continue. There's a couple of places where Paul says this in a way that makes it really clear. Where he says in Colossians 1, 22 and 23, he's talking about God is going to present you unblameable in His sight. If you continue. If you continue. And we have a thing going on even to this day where it says you don't have to continue. You got it. You don't have to continue in the faith. You don't have to continue in charity, holiness, sobriety. You don't have to because you got it in the bag. And that is something that Paul just throws in here because he's very, very vehement about this. In Romans, he says the same thing. He says, God will show His goodness if you continue in His goodness. That's Romans 11:22. Look it up. God will continue in His goodness if you continue in His goodness. And so, I know that's not going to be very popular in here, but women get saved the same way as men. And it's not through having kids, and it's not by saying, got it in the bag, I just skate into eternity. No. So that's what I wanted to say. I've unloaded the whole 9 yards on you, and I want to say, Lord, I pray that you would take this and you would do that which is necessary to make what I said actually be of glory to you and reflect your character, and it would be an edification to the body of Christ. Amen.